Hello, and welcome to the Human 2 podcast, the podcast that investigates how we stay human and true to ourselves during challenging times in our professional lives, with a focus on the accountancy and finance profession. After all, accountants are human too. I'm Hannah, founder of Accountancy Hub and director of Human 2 Limited. I'm also an organisational culture consultant and an ICAW chartered accountant. Today, I had the pleasure of talking to Zoe Tanner, who is founder and CEO at Sytrus, and she's also a dabbling angel investor. Leaning on her own experience of the struggle of finding the right type of support for each stage of a growing company, where the requirements are constantly changing, Sytrus provides fractional finance teams for rapidly scaling companies, providing a flexible solution where you can scale each level of expertise needed in the finance function as the company grows. Now they have a team of around 13 across their offices in London and Brighton. So, back to Zoe. She decided not to go to university. She studied AAT and then she went on to complete her ACCA studies. In this episode, we discuss exam fails and the pain of that. We discuss apprenticeships, becoming an entrepreneur, angel investing, the gender venture capital investment gap, and more. So, really hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, Zoe, and welcome to the Human 2 podcast.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you on this Wednesday morning?
I'm good.
Excellent. So I'm excited to chat to you today. We're going to talk a little bit about you and your career, and you're, the founder of a business. You're also an ACCA chartered accountant. You're an angel investor. So many things to talk about. But just to start off, can you just give me a little bit of an introduction to yourself and a summary of your career to date?
Wow, yeah. So I am Zoe and I live in London, and I founded Sytrus, where we provide fractional finance teams. So mostly working with clients that are rapidly scaling their startups. So constantly changing requirements provides us a really interesting set of work. But before I started Sytrus, I started my accountancy training in a small firm in Hove near Brighton when I was 19. I did the AAT level 3 and 4 before going on to do ACCA. And I'm sure we'll get into lots of other bends in the journey as well as we get into this.
So you started off with AAT, which is a route many people take. How did you find those training years, AAT all the way through ACCA as well? What was good and what did you find challenging?
Yeah, so I actually really enjoyed it. I think the context for me was going into it. I was definitely aware that a lot of my friends were at uni, and although I knew even then that wasn't the right path for me, I did feel as though I was missing out. And I felt a lot of pressure when I was at college that university was kind of the only route that you were ever going to be able to make a living, let alone any sort of success for yourself. So I took a year where I was working full time in retail between finishing college and starting my training course. And I was genuinely so worried. That's 15 years ago now, and I can still remember how paranoid I was that I was just going to sort of stagnate there and stay in this kind of entry level role for the rest of my life, and that, I hadn't gone to university, so I wasn't going to amount to anything, which, is so sad to think back on, really. But by the time I started this training course, I was just so delighted to have those clear markers of progress, and one exam under the belt at a time was just a really nice kind of sense of forward momentum, I think. But that said, I also have a really specific memory of at the beginning of AAT, like all the people in the company I was working for just always joking about how easy the AAT was. They were like, you just go into the exam room, write your name down, and you'll come out with a pass. But for me, the first one, I went straight on to level 3. So, the principles of double entry were completely new to me. And I remember after maybe 3 months or so in the role and a bit of self-study, I was like, this is ridiculous. I just need to get my first exam booked, which I did. But clearly I wasn't ready because I failed it. I just remember being so humiliated when I went back into the office, and people were asking about it. Again, this backdrop of everyone just saying how easy it is. And yeah, I can remember that sense of shame even now. But about a month later, I sat it again, and within 4 years or so, I passed both of those levels and the ACCA. So at Sytrus, I do always tell the guys here that the AAT is a really good stepping stone. And for me, I didn't actually find the step up to ACCA that much different, because you then started to have that kind of context, whereas on the AAT it's all such new concepts to you. They're challenging in slightly different ways, but yeah, I think I really enjoyed that combination of learning on the job, and those really clear markers of moving forward by getting exams under your belt.
It's so strange that there is so much shame still around failing exams. And, I was the same with the ACA. I failed a few of the first exams, found double entry really difficult. It's like a different language. And I'm still not over it. I'm still not over failing those exams. And it is that sort of, if people in the office think it's really easy and then you fail, then, it doesn't feel good. And these aren't easy exams. They're not at all.
No, and if you're failing ones that are early on in the journey, I think the fear was, oh my goodness, if I'm struggling with this, how on earth am I going to get through to the end? Yeah, it was definitely, I remember really questioning whether I was going to be cut out for it. And I literally can remember exactly where my boss was standing when he came into the office, basically assuming that I'd passed it. And when I had to say no, I hadn't, he was like standing right next to my desk, and I just remember feeling so embarrassed. But again, you shouldn't, and some of our guys have had to deal with failures and stuff along the way, but hopefully the expectation wasn't that it was so easy in the beginning.
So did you always know you didn't want to go to university? Was that a decision you'd made at quite a young age, or when was it that you thought, actually, that's not the route for me?
No, it wasn't a decision I made before. In fact, having been told that if I didn't do the UCAS process during college, I'd have to change tutor groups, I kind of I did the UCAS process, but I hadn't done my work experience at the time. There are various different factors, but ultimately I was applying for a primary ed degree. And I didn't get into a course that would have been 3 years. I'm trying to remember back to it now. I got into a course that would have been 4 years long, and it was sort of in Twickenham. So I thought, well, actually, the accommodation costs are going to be pretty pricey, and you can't exactly work alongside doing a teaching degree. So I sort of worked out the maths, and I just thought, you know what, it's going to be at least 50 grand's worth of cost. And I think my family probably would have helped me to some degree, but at the time I knew that the starting salary of a teacher was like 19,000 or something. I was like, it's just not going to add up, especially as a woman, where at the time I was, very much thought I'd be having kids in your mid-20s or whatever you think when you're that age. And I just thought, how are those numbers ever going to stack up in a timeline that makes any sense? So I decided not to take that job, and I took a year, like I say, to work out what my options were without having to go to university.
I think that's very sensible, and I think apprenticeships are becoming more and more popular in every single type of role and profession, and I think more people will be taking that time out after school or whatever to just think about, actually, do I really want to go to university? And hopefully schools won't be funneling people into university as the only option, sort of thing. Um, so you were an audit senior, and then your next role was a finance director. How did that come about? And just tell me about that whole transition.
So, one of the reasons that I went into accountancy in the first place, and actually one of the reasons I suppose that I didn't take that university position, was that my boyfriend, when I was in college, had started a company. So I think we must have been I think I was probably 16, he was 19. And at the time, it was already a very serious relationship. It went on to last 12 years. But I was always really fascinated by business, I think, and by entrepreneurship in general. And so I was highly involved in and interested in that company from the moment he started it. Also, my dad had his own business when I was growing up as well. So the year after I qualified, that business had gone, I think, from turning over about 1 million to about 3 million in that year. So it was a big year of growth, and it was just becoming increasingly apparent that the bookkeeping solutions that we had in place just were breaking at the seams. But we'd always found it a challenge to get the right type of support. So it wasn't the startup scene that we've got now back then, and we were outside of London as well. So maybe there would have been a bit more support around, but we hadn't come across it. So I actually started Sytrus at that point, thinking that if we were facing that problem, we probably weren't the only company. And so I took on a finance assistant. And then for the first sort of 2 years of Sytrus, really, we were basically just exclusively focused on that company, the company myself and my ex had. And actually, then we ended up going through an acquisition where we purchased a company that was bigger than us. And then, so with some organic growth, I think within 18 months or so, we were turning over like 10 million. It was a really, it was a big role. It ended up being a real interesting challenge, but there wasn't really any time to spend on any other like Sytrus work. But combining the companies were very, very asset heavy, very asset driven, like physical higher products. And so combining the two warehouses, about 55 employees, 2 different locations, it was a lot more of a challenge than I was expecting it to be. But it was an amazing opportunity. I mean, it's highly unlikely that in any other circumstance I would have gotten that opportunity at that type of age and stage in my career. But yeah, I mean, I learned so much as well, because we were making reasonably good profit margins by that point. The very early days were extremely stressful, as they are in startup worlds, but we'd kind of gotten to a good point. And whereas the company that we'd purchased really hadn't been focusing on their margins, they hadn't been investing in the right equipment, and their clients were much better than ours in many ways, really well established, well paying clients, but they weren't making profit. And so that, I think, just really cemented those first principle kind of theories to me, and seeing it in action, like how a few decisions make such a big impact. Like, when is it a good time to use invoice financing? When isn't it? So yeah, it was a really challenging time, but a really amazing opportunity for growth. And it definitely ignited my passion for the accounting industry, and really seeing how you can make such a tangible difference in the success or failure of a company by managing the finance as well.
Wow, what an incredible experience and training ground, because I mean, you were still training, really. Well, you're building your experience, and then suddenly you've got a very influential role. And it's interesting that you saw that this other company that had huge clients, they actually weren't making profit because of their sort of internal systems and finance processes. You mentioned that your dad had his own company. Have you always had that entrepreneurial streak in you, you think, maybe from your parents, or, did that develop over time?
Yeah, I think so. I think even further back than that, I suppose, on my mum's side, quite a few of the family members are like in sort of farming and equestrian type things. So lots of like self-employed people. So quite small types of businesses. But my mum was a self-employed bookkeeper, still is a self-employed bookkeeper. And yeah, my dad had his own company. So I think the idea of going into something that isn't just sort of a PAYE position just felt quite natural, I guess. One of those things that I hadn't really questioned, I suppose. But yeah, I was also always interested in it. I think my dad always said that out of us 3 kids, I was the one that was more interested in what he was doing, and the kind of financial aspects of it as well. Yeah.
My mum set up her own company. I mean, she was a journalist. She worked in the media industry for a long time, and then set up her own production company. And her parents, my grandparents, were fish and chip shop owners in Blackpool. So I feel like I've also come from a family of entrepreneurs, business owners, and I guess it's always been in my psyche, even if I never sort of knew that that's what I wanted to do. But it's difficult being a business owner. It really, really is. And sometimes even I think, oh my gosh, it'd just be so nice to be employed and just get a regular paycheck. Wow, that'd be nice. What have you learned from being a business owner?
Goodness, I mean, I think in order to be a business owner, you have to enjoy learning, because it's just a constant barrage of lessons, whether you want them or not, I think. So yeah, I think just learning how to lead people and manage people better is an ongoing sort of challenge, I think. Finding that right balance of delegating but providing the right detail of information that they need in order to do the job well. And I think that will probably be an ongoing journey, really, forever. But yeah, gradually, I think over the last year or two, it's really felt like a sort of maturing time of Sytrus, and it does feel like the company is its own being that doesn't just rely on me, which is I mean, that it's been the case that it hasn't always relied on me for a long while, but there's been a maturing exercise in that last year or two that I've really enjoyed, and seeing Sytrus almost develop its own character in a way. But I think you do have to love it. I think, and you need to have a long-term view of it. I don't know how I would have found the journey if I didn't see Sytrus being an incredibly long-term plan. But yeah, I think looking back, I've always probably had a bit of an appetite for risk. I think you need to have that as well. And then I think as I'm getting a little bit older, it's trying to mitigate that a little bit as well, and make sure that you're not just always deferring your like potential gains to the future, and actually making sure that you're building something that works for you now as well. But yeah, I think you've got to be quite determined. My mum or my partner might describe that more as stubborn, but yeah.
How long has Sytrus been going now?
It'll be 9 years in July.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been a while. It feels like it feels like no time at all in many ways, because it's such different roles. Like every couple of years, you're doing something almost completely different.
So, as I mentioned at the start, you're also an angel investor, and we know that only 1.8% of VC funding goes to female founders. So, I wanted to know from your perspective, why do you think that is? I know that is a big question, but also what do you think we can do as a society to change that?
Oh, it is indeed a very, very big question. It's not a topic that I throw myself into too much, and I think part of the reason for that is because I do think my views on it might be a little bit controversial. But here we go. I'll share my thoughts, and if we can all just remember that they're just the thoughts of one person. But yeah, I personally, I really like the concept of there being kind of masculine and feminine kind of strengths that for example, feminine strengths being empathy and compassion, more patience, creativity, being more caring towards others, and masculine ones might be more like being assertive and self-confident and ambitious, decisive. And I think any founder and any type of leader, really, I think they owe it to themselves and anyone that they're working with to do quite a thorough inventory of what their own strengths are, and see where there are any gaps. And I don't think there's anything wrong with, typically speaking, women possessing more of these feminine kind of strengths and character traits. I think often there's a lot of male leaders that could do with having a lot more empathy and patience. And I think me as a female, as a founder and a leader, I really have worked hard to try and strengthen my self-confidence and lean into and embrace my ambition. But I think some of these traits are necessary across the board, and some of them are more vital when it comes to that really narrow window of venture-backed companies. So I think we need to be careful, in my opinion, about really almost trying to say that men and women are the same. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with, you know, as a woman, I am proud to be more ambitious probably than the average female person, but that's not something that we should be putting on all women. Like, I don't think I necessarily sit in the center of the bell curve, but I don't think that makes me wrong. But I also don't think that there's anything wrong with the majority of my peer group and friends who may or may not even want the promotion that they could go for in their employed roles. So, and as well, even being probably on the more ambitious end of the scale, I've personally chosen to bootstrap Sytrus, while many of my male counterparts have raised investment for very similar businesses. And you know, I've got different intentions probably for Sytrus than a lot of male counterparts running competitors to us. However, I do completely appreciate that those differences don't account for a 98% funding gap. I know that that is, you know, it's too far, but I suppose my controversial opinion is that maybe rather than aiming for something like 50-50, I think it probably should be more like 80-20 or 85-15. And I think it's really important to strengthen the offering that we have for companies that are building profitable bootstrap companies. Like, how do we help them scale better and stronger? Because, you know, the so-called lifestyle businesses are incredible. They definitely shouldn't be looked down upon. You know, making profit from the beginning of a company should be plan A for an awful lot of business models. And we must remember as well that overall, I believe the stat is just 1% of startups ever receive any VC funding. So whilst it is important to remember that this 98.2% division is shocking, it is a division within an incredibly small minority. So yeah, I think finding ways to support bootstrapped and profitable small businesses to scale into substantial companies, generating good profits and not just always sort of riding on that investment cycle, is also really important. But yeah, then of course there are, you know, that, let's say it's 15 or 20% that we think should be going to the female founded company, or I say we, I think maybe should be the number towards female companies. With the understanding I do have of the kind of VC space, I think to really move the needle on that, we do need more females in charge of investing. We need more women in VC roles, and I think, you know, the evidence that we see ourselves and others and then make hiring decisions or investment decisions is really strong. So I think we need to continually work on creating diversity within the decision makers who are deploying that capital. And then I think for what people can do themselves, I think, you know, the VC games means scaling fast. It means being extremely ambitious, and if you're not in that category, male, female, or anything else, you're not going to get that funding. So if you're sure that scaling really rapidly and in a market where there's a significant addressable market, you know, you need to demonstrate with confidence very clearly right from the beginning within your pitch deck and within all presentations that you are extremely ambitious. And I think, you know, there are reasons why women might have to go slightly further out their way to demonstrate that, and it's a shame. It shouldn't have to be that way, but I think the reality is that, at least for now, we've got to kind of overcompensate, say, slightly, unfortunately, for the fact that whether that is less common in our gender or whether that's a misconception, either way, just work on that communication skills, confidence, and really proactively showing and demonstrating that you have got what VCs are looking for, which is, like I say, the 1% that's going to turn into that unicorn, or that's going to give them their 10x or 100x. And then, sorry, I realise I've been talking for a while, but final point I would say is that I think our male counterparts are much more prepared to pay for professional fees to get support from an early stage. I think often that confidence starts with internal confidence, and I think if you believe that you're going to be successful in raising funding, you're going to make sure that your pitch deck is absolutely flawless, and you're going to find the right resources and the right professional support to make sure that that's in place and under your belt at the beginning. And in my experience on the whole, I think sometimes women can find it a little bit harder to back themselves in that and get the right building blocks in place right from the start on the assumption that they're going to succeed. But then understandably, given that only 1.8% of funding is then going their way, so it can be a bit of a chicken and egg.
I don't think that was that controversial. It was interesting. And I mean, as you said, I guess not a huge amount of funding comes out of VCs anyway. And I certainly think you already have to be quite profitable and successful to even get VC funding. I mean, I did like ages ago, and I'm not sure why I even did this now. You know, we weren't really even a concept, but I was getting in touch with VCs and sending out my pitch deck, which I'd just put together myself and hadn't had any support with. And you know, they want to see a year at least of good profits. So you know, it was too early for me even to be having those conversations. And I guess that's where you fund it yourself, or you find an angel investor at those very early stages. But then I think you're right that even if you are a few years in and profitable, it's about getting that extra support with your pitch deck, having that ambition, having that confidence, and I guess really thinking you need that VC, because by that point you might be like, why do I even need them if it's going in the right direction? You know, what do you actually need the money for?
Yeah, exactly. And it really is, I think there's so much talk of it, and there's so much talk in particular of the funding gap, that I think the motivations people have sometimes for raising can be misaligned with their actual objectives for the business. And I think, you know, it's very, it can be very sexy to say that they've raised a 3 million seed round or something, but actually what are you going to use that money for? And it, again, it can be a kind of hallmark of success that have what's your head count, how many people are you employing. But I think profit is so much better. You might not put that on your LinkedIn, but you know, if you can find a product that works, be that a service or a physical one, sell it and reinvest and continue to just to build steadily, then that's a really viable option. Of course, there are business models that don't lend themselves to that. Like, you know, we've got, like I say, most of our clients are venture backed, and they need to be. They're building a product, whether that's a SaaS product or we've got like interesting climate tech kind of projects that are going on that will be years and years and years before they make meaningful revenues, other than perhaps like government contracts or grants or whatever. And of course, you need tens of millions for a lot of these to get to the point where you've got anything at all to show for it. And that's absolutely where VC money should be going. But I honestly would like to think that when you've got something like that, where the scale of it is kind of obvious, you know, we are seeing amazing stories of those types of female founded companies that are coming through. So I think it's all out there to play for, and a lot of VCs have very much got it on their radar. So I think if you do follow the steps and the business is venture backable, if it's one that makes sense to have funding and it doesn't make sense to bootstrap, and you follow the right steps, there are amazing funds out there that are specifically really trying to even out that funding opportunity. So yeah, give me a shout if you need any female friendly VCs. If you've listened to everything else and you've got the right type of business that actually needs venture capital, then reach out and I'll see if I can do some intros.
Thank you, appreciate that. I feel like I've got to make a decent amount of money first. Proof concept. So this podcast is all about accountants being human too, and I ask this question to everyone. Can you tell me about a challenging time in your life/career and what you learned from that experience?
I can. Yeah, I mean, my dad went through some very serious mental health issues. Once when I was probably too young to really understand, but again when I was in my mid-20s, at which point he and my mum had split up. So a lot of the responsibility for his care sat with me, making sure that he had accommodation and quite often sorting things out when he got into trouble, which was more frequent when he was having sort of manic episodes. So I think during that time, I really had to grow up a lot. And I think I learned a lot about the type of person that I wanted to be, and the type of people that I wanted to spend my time with. I've been very fortunate with my own mental health, but I think I realised probably as well during that time that I probably had a few coping strategies which weren't sometimes working well, and making me strong, but other times probably not serving me as well. So I started having some therapy myself. And I think working on that self-awareness, and going through what I was going through with my dad and a few other factors ultimately culminated in the end of that 12-year relationship, which I'd been in since I was 15. So that was a tough time in itself. But very shortly after, my dad actually passed away very unexpectedly from a abdominal aortic aneurysm, so completely unrelated to his other health issues. But so I went from having a lot of caring responsibilities for him, to losing him completely, during a time that was very much a transition period. So yeah, that was really, really a tough time, as I'm sure you can imagine. And I already had Sytrus at that point, so it definitely had its impact on that as well. But yeah, I think I could probably keep you here for hours telling you about what I learned about that time, but I'll do my best to keep it brief. But I'd summarise by saying, yeah, therapy changed my life in ways that I just had no idea I wanted or needed when I started it. Just couldn't recommend finding a good psychotherapist enough. It just baffles me that there's still any stigma attached to it, but I think that is still changing. I think people are seeing it as a bit more of like an act of self-love, or a bit more in alignment with coaching, which I think is, it can't change quick enough, because that's definitely what my experience was of it. So yeah, that's one. Definitely, therapy is amazing. I'd say I also learned during that time that I have a lot more grit and determination than I'd realised. I think I found out that I was stronger than I realised. And then, of course, YOLO. You definitely do only live once. I think now I have that very much in mind, and the balance that I have between work and living is very much with that in mind. My partner and I absolutely love to go on adventures and travel as much as we can, and find any opportunity to get into a bit of mischief. So I really hope that I never sort of forget that lesson, and that we're always living life to the max and having a good laugh as well as working hard.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That is a lot of things happening at the same time, and amazing that you were a sort of a young carer. That must have affected you quite a lot, and as you said, you sort of how you look at life now. But then to lose your dad so suddenly as well is a shock. I lost my stepmom when I was 14 years old. She just had a heart attack, and she was incredibly healthy and fit. She was an amazing cook. She did lots of running, and she just dropped dead one day from a heart attack. And I think that's always affected me and how I look at life, because you just never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, you really don't, and you can't control anything. How old was she?
She was 55. So
that's such an awful, really, really young. Yeah, my dad was 62. Yeah, and it was essentially heart disease. I from what I understand, and yeah, just such a shock. But when you do think like how short that really does feel now, like in my mid-30s, you're like, that's a heck of a lot of life to pack in if that was going to be my end date as well, which of course hopefully it won't be, but yeah, in the meantime, live life to the max just in case.
Definitely. And how did you manage to keep the business going when you were going through all of that?
Well, I was so lucky, because by that point the transition of us being so reliant on the other company had already started to take place. And I'd had Darcy, who's with us now, like with us at Sytrus now as well. She'd already started, which was fantastic. I don't know how long she'd been with us at that point, but she really stepped up. It was a pretty lean operation. I think there were about 4 of us or so in the company, and yeah, we were in a position where we were able to kind of tick along for a while, which and it was right at the beginning of COVID as well, so everything had transitioned into remote. And I think I was probably, from a business perspective, just counting my lucky stars really, because we could just see how many people were having a really tough time. And a few of our clients were affected, but as many that were badly affected were actually getting quite a good leg up from the opportunities that COVID, like the transition to remote, because a lot of them were very tech enabled and forward thinking. Some of them, it presented an opportunity. So I think it's all a bit of a blur. I'm not sure how much detail I can remember, but I do remember that summer being extremely sunny and being so grateful to just be outside, and having a garden during that that COVID summer. So I just remember work kind of feeling very difficult to focus on for long periods of time, but being very fortunate that I didn't have to, be in an office for 8 hours a day or anything like that.
Yeah, COVID was absolutely bizarre, and I still think about it sometimes, and it's almost like we have forgotten what happened. It was so scary, and the Prime Minister got COVID, and we thought he might die, and I was back at home with my mum, and like you, very fortunate because I was surrounded by countryside and we had a garden, and people were in much worse situations. But it was, it was very, very strange.
It is wild to think about, isn't it?
Can I ask, do you think that being a chartered accountant has helped you as a business owner? I mean, lots of business owners aren't accountants, they're not chartered accountants, but do you think it somehow gave you more confidence? Or, and I'm saying that because I think it has for me. I feel like I'm on top of things and I understand my finances because I've got that foundation, but it'd just be good to hear what you think.
Yeah, I definitely do. Every now and then I kind of think to myself, how do people do it if they don't have that type of background? I can't remember what the statistic is, but I think the number of like FTSE 100 companies that are now, like, the CEO is like, used to be the CFO and is like accountant by kind of background, is growing massively. I think there's some pros and cons to that, but I definitely think for me it's extremely helpful. I'm sure. I mean, one of the things that we try and do at Sytrus is try and demystify what is important when it comes to finance function. So I think it's definitely possible to learn enough, and I can understand how people manage to build really successful companies without having the qualifications as such. But I mean, it's one of those number one kind of things that people say of advice, isn't it? Like, get a good accountant, get a good lawyer, and make sure your sales and marketing process is decent, and you'll be kind of halfway there to having a good company. But yeah, I really enjoy the fact that I feel like I'm all over the finances itself. I think, again, it's probably another example of just it really solidifying my passion for what we do, because I can't imagine how I'd make like decisions about when you hire the next person if I didn't have a budget and forecast that I felt was robust and that it actually met my needs. So I don't know how people go along kind of making those decisions up as they go along, but we're always in conversations with people saying how much stress that causes and how much it keeps them up at night because they don't know when they can hire the next person and things like that. So I think, it probably makes it slightly less stressful having that background.
So, final question, what would you tell your younger self, maybe teenager Zoe, if you could have a cup of tea with her now? What would you say?
Oh, I think that would be really nice. I think teenage Zoe would like to have a cup of tea with Zoe in her 30s. But yeah, I definitely would tell her that life is not as hard as people make it sound. It's all going to be fine. Just keep doing whatever feels like the right decision today, and the rest will work itself out. Just hang out with people that make you feel light and where you laugh a lot, and you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I think over the years I spent far more time worrying about making a decision that I might regret than I've ever spent regretting anything. So yeah, just live life and have fun and don't worry.
Oh, I wish I could do that. Constantly worrying.
There you go. Teenage Zoe should be listening, and you can listen right now as well, Hannah.
That was great. And yeah, I completely agree. Everything does work out, and yeah, just make the decision and don't worry about it too much.
Yeah.
My career changed into accountancy. I'm so glad that I did. And I would encourage everyone just to have a go at something that they've not tried before.
Yeah, and it's so rare that you make a decision that you really can't go back on. I think, it's like, is it somebody? I don't know if it's like Mark Zuckerberg or someone. I don't know. They're saying like if it's a two-way door, make the decision really quickly because you can change your mind again. If it's a one-way door, you need to be a bit more certain. But I think a lot of the time when it's a one-way door, you really know what you need to do, and there's going to be an array of other doors ahead of you. I think, like when I was younger, it just felt like everything was so permanent and that every decision was going to, complete, like the idea of like, oh, if I don't go to university, I'm not going to amount to anything ever. But I knew so confidently. If I look back, I knew with such surety that it wasn't the right thing for me, and I just second guessed myself and stressed myself out about it so much about making that decision. But actually, like, yeah, that one decision was never going to have the ability to have my life absolutely sewn up in a certain direction. If only you could make that one decision when you're 18 and make a good one and know that you're going to have a great outcome. But yeah, I think it's all just about looking at what you've got in front of you and trusting your gut a bit more.
I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much, Zoe, for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed getting to know you more, and thanks for sharing your challenging life moment. I absolutely love talking to people on this podcast and hearing those kind of significant moments in their lives. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely.